Welcome to another episode of Ignatius Press Off the Shelf with Vivian and myself, Father Fessio, here in San Francisco. Joseph Pierce, soon to be in Australia for a while, but now he's with us in South Carolina. We continue to discuss the Confessions by St. Augustine. We're going to be on book 11 now, Time and Eternity. And we've slowed down a bit for books 10 and 11 because this is where Augustine become very, very philosophical, and not just philosophical in a personal way, which he is, but he laid the foundations for, the whole scholastic age. I mean, Augustine is the author most quoted by Thomas Aquinas in the Summa Theologica. This is where we are now participating in the kind of the kernel, the fruitful core of a development which will take place over centuries after St. Augustine. This is Time and Eternity. I have something on page 333. Anybody before that?
No.
All right. Okay. Just before the chapter 4 there, where he's always praying as he's doing this, as you granted that servant of yours, me, Augustine, the grace to say those things, grant also to me the grace to understand them. So he's able to speak about these things. Now he says, chapter 4, heaven and earth plainly exist. By the very fact that they undergo change and variation, they cry out that they were made. So that's his argument for contingency. Anything which, well, not really from motion. Anything which moves had to get started, and therefore it's not the beginning. Bottom of that page. Yet not in the same way as you, their creator, are they beautiful and good. So he's talking about the beauty and the goodness of what we see around us. Not in the same way as you, their creator, are they beautiful and good, nor do they exist as you exist. Compared with you, they, and that means us and all of creation, have neither beauty nor goodness nor being. So that's the famous cataphatic and apophatic theology, or negative and positive. We say that, yes, these are beautiful. Yes, we exist. But compared to God, we're not beautiful. We don't even exist. So what is the synthesis of that? It's beyond our ability to fully comprehend or certainly imagine, but it is that God is so far above what we know to be his existence and beauty that all we can do is say that. We can't know what we're saying, though. So that's also a beautiful idea, which will have very fruitful consequences in ages to come.
I suppose we're trying to see it metaphorically in a transcendent sense. If something's a fraction of the infinite, it's infinitesimal. Well, how big or small is something infinitesimal, and how apart is it from the infinite? It's chalk and cheese, right? That it sort of exists as an infinitesimal, but it has no relation to the infinite.
Right. Incommensurate, they would say, yeah. Page 336, and this has to do with another very important thought. God's eternity, his atemporality, and creation's temporality, being in time. What's the relation? He expresses it here, chapter 7. The word in question is that word, capital W, who is God. God with you, who are God. That is the Son of God. He is uttered eternally, and through him are eternally uttered all things. This does not mean that one thing was said and then, when that was finished, another thing, so that everything could be mentioned in succession. No, all things are uttered simultaneously in one eternal speaking. What does that mean spiritually and consequentially right now? It means that we are no further away from the moment of creation than the Big Bang, if that's when the first moment was. 13, 14 billion years ago, that God is speaking his one word and
Mhm.
it's unfolding for us sequentially, but it's not unfolding sequentially for him. And
Mhm.
he sums it up on page 337, 4 lines down. Thus, in your word, who is co eternal with yourself, you speak all that you speak simultaneously and eternally. Whatever you say shall be, comes into being. Your creative act is in no way different from your speaking. Yet things which you create by speaking do not all come to be simultaneously, nor are they eternal. I mean, everything is contained in that. And by the way, if you want a little elaboration, I recommend Appendix B in C.S. Lewis's book Miracles, where Lewis, uh, collaborates, as I say, on this thought. But this is I mean, this is truth, okay? And if we reflect on truth, and partly that's what we do when we pray, we realize that, as St. Patrick said, we had on his feast day, God behind me, God before me, God above me, God below me, God within me. You know, we can't get away from God. And this whole question, I'm going to knock it off, but I'll just say it. This whole question of creation and evolution uh, is I think it is a misleading question. Uh, can lower forms become higher forms? Can something come from nothing? No, but something can come from something greater, and being can come from nothing, can come from God out of nothing. And so, what we see in evolution is not natural selection and survival of the fittest and beneficent mutations. What we are seeing is God's one single, simultaneous, eternal act of creation is one word unfolded for us in time. There's no contradiction between God's creation and evolution. Evolution is God's creation,
Mhm.
sequential in time, non sequential in God's creative word. I just,
Yeah, what I say to my atheistic scientistic friends is that I'm a skeptic about evolution, but it doesn't do anything with regard to my faith. In other words, if it was proved absolutely, the Darwinian evolution proved absolutely scientifically tomorrow, would not impact my faith one least bit, because that could be the way that God brings things into being. It's just a purely on the level of facts. I have questions that I don't think are adequately answered by the theory.
well, I will
The
say
my,
even more than that. I hate to do this to you, Joseph, but it not only does not, you know, uh, in any way diminish my faith, it increases my faith. It enriches my faith to realize that no, I'm watching creation right now.
Mhm.
When I look at evolution, I'm watching God acting. He's not some kind of clockwork God that created the universe and let it go and spin off. No, this is God acting right now in every atom, every molecule, every quark,
Mhm.
every electron, every neutron, every gluon, every
A wonderful, really contemplative experience. Remember that fellow, this was back in the 80s, he pieced together development of a human being in the womb through, time lapse
oh yeah,
photography
yeah.
and all these things. Can't remember what it was called. And it was set to music. To see the unfolding of the human being from this one cell, then multiple cells, and then the heart beating, and then okay, and all that this continuous act of creation, all the while is the same one human being, but going through all of these stages of development in time, but never ever changing what in essence it is. But
right.
going through these development stages in time, you
Mhm.
know, uh, it's so wonderful and beautiful and amazing. And like, why do we have to get into these false dichotomies of um, how is that not creation going through this process of development? Or how is
Right.
that not what it is from the beginning and where it turns up in the end? How is that the same person or whatever? Why do we get ourselves into these false dichotomies? just marvel at it, you know? Start with that. Anyway.
And
But
it's God the storyteller, right? The evolution and whatever you want to call it, it's God the storyteller, in unfolding things in time for our discovery and enjoyment.
yes, and Augustine is one of the key figures so that we do not have that dichotomy,
Mhm.
because he experienced a dichotomy. That is, he
Yeah.
was outside himself, away from God,
Mhm.
but then he realized, wait a minute, I can't be outside of God,
Mhm.
you know?
Mhm.
All right, let's see. That was temple. Oh, now comes wow. This is the big problem here. Page 343. You know, Augustine says, bottom of the page there, uh, 3 lines up. What then is time?
Mhm.
If no one asks me, I know. If I want to explain it to someone who asks me, I do not know. You know, we use time in a sense. What time is it? You know, how much time you got? I was on time. We know what that means. But what is time in itself? You know, and page 344. This is the main thing, the new paragraph there. Now, what about these two times, those past and future? In what sense are they a real being? If the past no longer exists and the future does not yet exist, so wait a minute. What is past time? It's gone. It doesn't exist anymore, right? What about future time? It's not here yet. As for present time, if that were always present and never slipped away into the past, it would not be time at all. It would be eternity. If therefore the presence only claim to be called time is that it is slipping away into the past, how can we assert that this thing is, when its only title of being is that it will soon cease to be?
Mhm.
In other words, we cannot really say that time exists except because it tends to non-being. Now, this is very paradoxical,
Mhm.
you know.
And brilliant. It's brilliant.
Uh, I'll kind of sum it up later, but I just want to go through here, pick out a few sentences,
Mhm.
uh, and now time to go.
I'd like to comment on this at some point, but I'm
Okay,
in no
well,
hurry
go
to.
ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I remember you and I having a discussion about this at Harvard University. The point is that he says later on at page 349 the same thing, that the future doesn't exist. But of course, in God's omnipresence, it does. So it doesn't exist to us because we can't perceive it or experience it, but it does exist because it is happening in God's presence in the same way as the past is. So we have to make that distinction between God's omnipresent time, if we want to call it that, and our experience of temporal time.
Yes, and let me mention a very disturbing corollary of that. Uh, our past exists just as much as our present does. It hasn't disappeared. That means all our past sins are still present to God. However, we can actually affect the past with an A, affect the past by repentance. And so that past sins, even though they continue to exist in God's eternal moment, uh, take on a different valence, if you will, or a different meaning if we've repented of them. Just like Christ's wounds are still there, but they're glorified. Because I mean, you know, the last judgment, if we're all there and it's all happening and we all see each other, it's not going to be a closed courtroom, you know. Uh, Everyone's going to see all my sins, and I'm going to see theirs. That's painful. You know, that's part of what purgatory is. We're going to see our sins and know that the whole world, not just a couple of friends or whatever, but billions and billions of people are watching, looking at me sinning. But we want them to see us repenting as well. That's the important thing. Um, 345, about 6 lines down. We ought not, therefore, to say that error in the past was a long one, for we shall not find anything that was long, for since that point at which it became past time, it no longer had any being. Well, see, that's Augustine's Augustine's in a process here, but that's false. I mean, we can't. Past duration is duration, even though we say it doesn't exist. It's duration in some sense. Page 346, the line before the new paragraph at the bottom. Hence, the present is reduced to a vanishing point, and that's the paradox of time. Is past doesn't exist in our minds, in our reality in time. The future doesn't exist in time, and the present is slipping away. You can't grab a hold of it. Page three.
I think Chesterton somewhere describes trying to live in the present as being similar to trying to someone sitting down on a pin that you jump up in very quickly. I mean, it is like the mathematical point, right? That by the time you're aware of it, it's already the past. So, so we're never aware of the present because by the time we're thinking about it, it's already the past.
Right, and to lay foundation here for something we're going to get to. I mean, Zeno, who preceded Augustine by some 600 or 700 years or more, had this paradox. If I go halfway to the goal, I still haven't got there yet. If I go halfway from there, I haven't got there. And you can keep going halfway and halfway and half, and you'll never get there. And of course, the response was solvitur ambulando. You solve it by walking, you get there. But the point is, what it means is that time can't be a succession of instantaneous non-temporal instants because they're zeros. They don't add up to anything,
That's why I always had a hard time understanding first downs in football. You know how, like, as soon as they land the ball, whatever, it's another down, and then it's another first down. It took me the longest time to figure out what was going on.
All right, well, we'll get to that. Or maybe page 352, new paragraph 3, chapter 23. I was once told by a certain learned man that the movements of the sun, moon, and stars themselves constitute time. I did not agree with him. Why, in that case, should not the movements of all corporeal things constitute time? And as a matter of fact, here is where Augustine is wrong, but we'll see later on that he also has an opposing view, so he hasn't resolved it. But there is this tendency in the human imagination to consider time as this vacuum in which all things take place, and time itself is absolute. That it's not part of any motion. It's the measure of motion. It's what we use to measure motion. Well, and that was Newton's view, absolute time. But Einstein, of course, with the theory of relativity, blew that out of the water. There is no time without motion. Space and time are one continuum. And therefore, there's no such thing as an absolute, abstract, non-material clock, so to speak, a box in which all these things take place. We're measuring by that clock. No, we're measuring by each other. And the only absolute is what? He should have called his theory the theory of absoluteness, because the speed of light is absolute, and all things are relative to the speed of light. He called it relativity. That's too bad, because it had a terrible psychological effect on mankind.
Yes.
That everything's relative. Well,
right.
No,
that isn't what he said. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Continuing here, bottom of the page, about 6 lines up. Is it the movement that constitutes a day, or the time it takes? Well, the answer is it is the movement which constitutes the day. And Augustine is confused here, but it's a confusing thing. Page 354, 4 lines from the bottom, or 5. No corporeal object moves except within time. And you see, that's where he's wrong. He's thinking that time is somehow abstracted from the body, from the corporeal body. The body's movement is time.
Mm.
And even Aristotle said time is a measure of motion. Aristotle was closer to this than either Plato or Augustine, I think. Page
Can,
3.
can I ask you a question, Father? Can I ask a question on this page? I did highlight one sentence here, which I think is probably very profound. I'm not sure I've got my head around it. So just
Okay.
above what you just said there, above chapter 24, 3 lines from the end of chapter 23, I see, therefore, that time is a kind of strain or tension. That seems to be sort of saying something very aphoristically profound, but I'm not sure I understand it.
Well, we'll get to that because he's going to come back to that in a couple of pages. So let's get there.
Okay. All right. Okay, good.
355, 6 lines down. When we add a definite indication of length of time, we do so by reference to some standard, agreed standard. And, he's going to say we can make a day or whatever. Einstein will say, well, the standard is the speed of light. New paragraph there. Therefore, if the motion of an object is one thing, and the standard by which we measure it is another, which is not, is it not obvious which of the two has the stronger claim to be called time? So he's here arguing for absolute time, but that's not right. Page 356, 2 lines at the bottom. Do we measure a longer time by the standard of a shorter, as you use a cubit to measure the span of a crossstreet? And the answer to that is yes. So we measure, time by the rotation of the Earth, in 24 hours. Next page, 57, new paragraph. But the mensuration of time by these methods yields no result that is absolute. He's actually right on this. What do we point to as the absolute? The sun, the Earth's rotation, or the orbit of Mars? There's no absolute. He couldn't find it. That's right, because he didn't have the instruments to find it. Now here comes the answer to your question, Joseph. New paragraph there. I have therefore come to the conclusion that time is nothing other than a tension, but tension of what? I do not know. I would be very surprised if it was not tension of consciousness itself. That goes by the name of Immanuel Kant in German. But Kant's idea is the noumena, the reality there, is atemporal and aspatial. But our mind, our consciousness imposes the categories of time and space. And so Augustine here is a precursor of Kant, saying that, look, I can't find an absolute measure out there. So I guess somehow there's a tension in the mind between the past and the future. And that tension is what constitutes time. And that's exactly what Kant will, codify later on. Almost finished
Which is
here.
which is problematic, right? Because it
Yeah.
doesn't sort of lay the foundations for nihilism and relativism and
And the thing is, in this sense, Kant got the concept right, but the mind wrong. It's tension in God's mind, that's for sure. But it's not tension in our mind which constitutes time. 59 to the bottom there, several lines. Evidently, then, what I am measuring is not the syllables themselves, which no longer exist, but something in my memory, something fixed and permanent there. In you, my mind, I measure time. Do not interrupt me by clamoring that time is objective existence. Well, I do interrupt you because it does have. And finally, the next page. What I measure is the impression which passing phenomena leave in you, my mind, which abides after they have passed by. But here's a perfect example of the refutes that. You don't need a mind to measure time. You can actually set a timer. You set it to 20 and you go away and you do something and it goes bing and you say, okay, that took, even if I was asleep, that took 20 minutes. So a device can measure time. So it doesn't take a mind to measure time. So Augustine was profound on this. I don't think he could have gone any farther than he did. He raised the questions. The answer had to wait about 1,500 years until Einstein. And that is all I have on this wonderful chapter on time and eternity.
But what's so great about the way he goes about thinking about these things, the humility that you pick up as he goes along. So on page 356, the top few lines there, woe is me, for I do not even know what I do not know. I mean,
Very good.
that's great, right? In the middle of all of this, he says something like that. So you can bear with him because of his humility.
Very good. So we'll conclude this episode now, and I think we'll probably be able to do the last two books, 12 on heaven and earth, and 13 on days of creation, at our next episode. So thank you, everyone, for listening and watching, and hope to see you next time. God bless you.